Afternoon, tubers. I know it's been a while since I posted some videos. I've been hauling some firewood around and doing some other stuff. My niece is playing baseball, so I've been going to a lot of her games and not having a lot of time to make videos anymore. But I thought today I would see if the old 350 would start. It's been sitting for several years since the last video I made. It's been stored there under my rack. All I've done so far is roll her out. I don't remember. I might have taken the module out of the distributor, and I've got to get wires hooked up to the starter, battery cables. I stole them off here for the go-kart or something else. So I'm going to round up some stuff and I'll be right back. Okay, I found some cables off of the 3.8 over there, and I got them all mounted up. My door's going to slam shut. Got the ground on there. They're not the greatest cables, but they'll work for a test start. I wouldn't trust them for something I was going to drive every day, but they'll work to roll this thing over. I've had a couple people ask me how to get an engine started that's been sitting a long time. You know, what's the best way to go about doing it so that you don't hurt the engine or you know, cause some damage or anything. Well, the first thing you want to do is check the oil. Obviously, there's got to be oil in the engine. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just under the full mark. It's pretty black, but I haven't done anything to this motor yet. You want to check the oil, make sure there's oil in it. Obviously, if it's in a car, there'd be a radiator and stuff. If there's not a radiator, you can still run the engine. A lot of people cry and whine and piss and moan about, oh, it's going to get too hot, you're going to blow the head gaskets out, blah, blah, blah. If you've ever watched the Demolition Derby, engines like this, especially big heavy V8s that are all cast iron, will run a long time with no antifreeze in them. Granted, I wouldn't do it to something that you really value. You could run a motor like this for 2 or 3 minutes and it's not going to get too hot to cause any damage. If you're really, really concerned about it, take the thermostat out and put a garden hose right in there and let it fill the engine up with water and let it run right out on the ground. You know, if you really, really want to run it a long time, run it like they do the marine engines. You know, you just stick a garden hose in it. Another thing you want to check, if it's got an automatic tranny like this one has, is check the tranny fluid. Make sure there's at least some in there. Obviously, if it's low when you start it, it's going to fill the torque converter and it'll be low. It may not shift, but you want to make sure that there's fluid in the tranny so that it lubricates everything, because that stuff's going to be spinning when the motor starts. Stick shift, it's not so critical. Obviously, if the engine and tranny have been sitting out and they're full of water, that's a bad sign. Next thing you want to do is see if it rolls over. Now, it may turn very hard. Oh, I can't do this with one hand. See if I can hold the camera like this. Okay, this rolls right over. You want to make sure that it's not stuck. A lot of times a valve, especially if it's been sitting out in the weather, a valve, usually an exhaust valve, will be open. One of them out of the 8 will be open. I mean, it's just inherent that one of them will be open, probably more than one. And humidity and moisture will go up the exhaust pipe and through the port and rust the shaft of the valve, and then it may not want to close. It may not want to open, but it will open easier than it will want to close because the push rod will push it open. Sometimes you'll bend a push rod if you force it over and one of the valves is stuck. You know, you put a big pipe on here and a big breaker bar and force it over to a spot that's hung up and just reef it past. You're probably going to bend a push rod. And the other thing is you may push the valve open, but the valve may not close. And especially on what they call an interference engine, when the piston comes up to top dead center, if one of those valves is stuck open, that piston may hit that valve. And rolling it over slow, probably all you're going to do is bend the valve. But if you crank her over and it fires and it hits that valve, I mean, you may cave the top of the piston in. You know, you could cause some catastrophic failure. So you want to roll it over, preferably all the way over a couple times, and make sure that it doesn't seem to catch in any spots. If it does, probably wouldn't hurt to pull the valve covers off and make sure that all the rockers are going and all the valves are returning back home. Another thing, if the engine's been sitting a really, really long time, Pull the spark plugs out. Put a couple squirts of 10W30 down in the spark plug holes and roll it over. That'll lubricate the cylinder walls and stuff so that when it fires up, you don't score any of the cylinders. It'll smoke. You know, Al Gore will be real happy with that. But, you know, you risk scoring a cylinder if it doesn't get oil right away. Another thing you can do is, once you check all this stuff over, is don't put power to the coil. On this Chevy, the coil coil's in the cap of the distributor and it's hooked up to this wire here. Don't hook that up. You know, if you've got an oil pressure gauge, or if the electronics are screwed up on the car, screw an oil pressure gauge right into the block. Now, on the Chevy, this is the oil pressure point right here that the sending unit would be screwed into. Now, I obviously have to screw something in there. It's going to shoot oil out. I have a little gauge that I'll screw in there. Screw a gauge in there, and then crank it over with the key without the ignition hooked up until you get a little oil pressure. That'll lubricate the bottom end and get some oil up on the cam and everything like that before it, you know, gets high revs. And once the thing starts, don't hold it right to the floor. Don't rev it up. Just let it sit there and idle. If you got to tap the gas a little bit to keep it going, or feather with the choke or whatever, you know, let it get a little bit of oil pressure built up. And I mean, especially if it's been sitting a while, there's going to probably be some rust and stuff in there, you know, and you don't want that to score up anything or bust anything. If you hear any strange noises, you know, shut her down, investigate, pull the valve covers off, see what's going on. If the valve's hung up, it's going to sound real metallic in the upper end, you know, kind of a hollow metallic kind of sound when the rocker's going back and forth and slamming on the valve. You know, if you're lucky, you won't have hit a piston and damaged anything. So I'm going to get my oil pressure gauge and screw that in there, and I'll probably roll this baby over without the coil hooked up, without any gas in it or anything yet, and see if I got any oil pressure just to make sure before I get the gas hooked up to it. I'll probably just fill the bowl because I'm not going to run it very long. So I'll get my gauge around and check right back. Alrighty, got my oil pressure gauge in. On these Chevys, you got to have a little extender. I have this extender. It's all made one piece, but you can use an 1/8 inch nipple and coupler to do that. In other words, the gauge hits on this part of the intake manifold and it won't screw down in. So, connect up the battery here. Slide her over here close. See if we got any contact. Yep. So now I'm going to turn her over and watch that oil pressure gauge and make sure that there it goes. Alright, so that means we definitely got some oil pressure happening. So now, I'll take the air cleaner off, get my squirter of gas. Now what you're going to want to do is you can just dump gas down in here and it'll fire and run for a little bit until it uses that gas up. But this is a Holley 4-barrel. And this is the vent to the bowl in the front, and this is the vent to the bowl in the back. So if you just put gas in here, you'll fill the bowl up, and then it should start and idle. And you can squirt a little bit of gas in there, not too much. I don't think that wire is going to be long enough. No, it's not. Alright, so I think there's a here's a hunk of red wire right here. We'll use this. Push the red wire down in the positive terminal.